Well, hi, and welcome back to our second portion of the segment that we're talking about here today, face-to-face conversations. In this case today about motor vehicle accidents with Melissa Correo and the attorney in our office that handles these type of accidents. Melissa, we were talking about the statute of limitations, and you correctly spoke about the 3-year statute of limitations, during which time from the date of the accident a case has to be put into suit. And also I was very pleased that you emphasized the importance of, if it's not put in within that 3 years, you lose the opportunity for a suit. Let me ask you, it's in the statute of limitations area, but it's slightly different. We've seen this regrettably. The father passes away as a result of a fatal motor vehicle accident on a business trip somewhere. How is that case dealt with in terms of being able to go forward, even though the plaintiff, in this case, the father, has deceased? Who can bring that action? What kind of an action is it, and what's the time period to initiate the action?
Okay, John, well, assuming that the business trip still happened in New York State and we're under New York State law, the beneficiaries of the deceased can still bring an action. However, although it's 3 years from the date of accident for a motor vehicle accident, it is 2 years from the date of death in New York State. So if the injury from the motor vehicle accident is death, then your statute changes and you have 2 years from the date of death, which could be sometimes at the accident site or later on from the injuries or complications from the injuries from the accident. It can happen later.
So if, for example, someone was injured in a motor vehicle accident and, for lack of a better word, it's, you don't like to use the word, but lingers for a period of time and has treatment, and even, for example, a year later were to pass away from the accident injuries, then the action brought on behalf of the either spouse or children of the decedent would be 2 years starting at the date of death going forward.
Right.
What is the name of, what do you call that kind of an action?
That's a wrongful death suit.
So wrongful death is brought to establish essentially the validity of the injury and the death which the injury caused, but to do it by people who were beneficiaries and were financially supported by the decedent in this case. Generally speaking, it tends to be a family relative or sometimes a parent, which fits into the category of just a horrible, horrible tragedy.
Yes.
When someone comes to you and has just recently had an accident, and perhaps they went to the emergency room, for example, often you hear, well, I had an x-ray and everything is negative. What recommendations do you make in terms of the kinds of evaluations of their injury? And there are more than x-rays. X-ray has been around, I guess, 3/4 of a century, but there are newer and in some instances better treatment modalities.
Right. Well, an x-ray isn't going to show you everything that could potentially be going on. An x-ray is just going to show you if you've fractured that particular bone or not. But there still could be injuries to the tissue or the muscle or something else that an x-ray just won't show you. So I always recommend following up with an orthopedist who can then refer you to get an MRI.
The other type of medical tool, I guess you would say, that would allow physicians to look inside of our bodies to see what the injury is a CAT scan. And I've had a number of doctors suggest that in many ways you have a sort of a 3-tier. You have an x-ray, which I think everyone is familiar with that term. Well, I had an x-ray done, but the reality of it is, especially in a motor vehicle impact where you have trauma and frequently fractures occur, that's kind of the, for lack of a better word, the lower standard. And then you have a CAT scan, which is also a higher level of sophistication, but then clearly the MRI. Now, in New York State, if someone says, I think, and it's recommended by an attorney or another physician, hey, listen, I think you ought to go and get an MRI, you just can't walk along the street and pop into the local MRI. You need to take a step before that, don't you?
Right, exactly. Well, that's why I said that, if a client has been in an accident and the x-ray is negative and not showing anything, yet they're still experiencing pain, my recommendation is to follow up with an orthopedist who can do a further evaluation. The orthopedist will refer them to get the MRI and they can really see what's going on.
I think that we shouldn't put a period in our discussion without putting in a very strong word, and I have to just go back, if I may, to my own experience when I was in the state legislature, and I believe it was probably somewhere in the early 80s that our seatbelt law came into effect. I remember voting on that, and believe it or not, it was very vigorously opposed by many people. Oh, well, listen, we should have a freedom of expression. We want to put a seatbelt on, we'll do it, and if we're not, we'll suffer the consequences. And then I remember when we enacted the law, and Governor Cuomo at the time had signed it into law, I believe we were getting somewhere around 5 or 7% of compliance, in other words, people using their seatbelts. And I saw a recent study that had it pretty close to 98% of people using seatbelts. So it's interesting, over a period of time, everyone has probably heard about some friend or family member that may have had an accident and said, thank God I had my seatbelt on. So we should put in a word of that, because that has now become extremely important. If someone is injured in an automobile accident, I think one of the first questions asked, oh, by the way, were you wearing your seatbelt? And that is an important thing to do, very practical and a very safe thing, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Are you finding that question, do you find asking that question fairly early on after meeting a person that's been in an accident and, hey, by the way, were you wearing your seatbelt? And are you finding that most people, in fact, are?
Sure, definitely.
I thank you very much. I've enjoyed this conversation with regard to the motor vehicle accidents, and appreciate very much you taking the time. We have a range on our website of many of the areas that we practice where we have our face-to-face conversation, just like today with Melissa, and invite you, if you're interested in that subject area, just to click it on. And always our theme is doing it with the layman's language in mind. No fancy legal language, but trying to provide information that those of you who are lay people are sitting and hopefully learning something about the law from our conversations. So until we see you the next time on our face-to-face, thanks very much. This is John Dearie, and we look forward to hearing from you. Feel free to contact us anytime at our info@johndearie.com. You'll see that at the bottom of the screen, and we'll be delighted to hear from you. If you had any questions, we'll be also very pleased to respond to them. So thanks a lot for this time, and look forward to seeing you again. So long now.